My name is Elana, and I use they, them pronouns.
And my name is Jesi. I use she, her pronouns.
And we're Making Mensches.
Making Mensches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We are on episode 3 of our Judaism and Abolition series. Today, we're really excited to be talking to my dear friend Rachel. Rachel Joy is an abolitionist social worker, lay leader, and organizer who has been teaching, leading Jewish services, and community building with folks inside jails for the past 5 years. Rachel spent the last 9 months organizing with Matir Asurim, the Jewish care network for incarcerated people, and also started the New York City Resource Library, which is a database of free resources across New York City and an in-person mutual aid distribution. Wow, Rachel, we're so excited to have you here. We're starting everyone off with the same question just because there's so many different ways that people think about abolition and talk about abolition. So to get us started, what does abolition mean to you?
To me, abolition at its core means believing in a better world. It means believing in a world where we can respond to harm, to conflict, to community issues with care and with love and with safety instead of with violence. More materially, abolition also means the complete dismantling of mechanisms of state violence, of jails, of prisons, of immigrant detention, of all of those agencies that enforce jails and prisons and immigrant detention, and also the way that we allow those carceral spaces to infiltrate our day-to-day lives, our interpersonal relationships, our community relationships, our organizing, the things that we do that keep us isolated from each other, that have us lead with punishment and with violence in our own communities. The world that abolition imagines is one where we can move through anything that is in front of us with care and softness and community, and that we can move through everything together, whereas all of these other systems require that people move through the most difficult times in their life alone and with shame. Abolition allows us to move through it with community care.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. Can you tell us, for folks who aren't familiar, what Matir Asurim is and what they do, but also what does Matir Asurim mean?
The translation of Matir Asurim is to free the captive, and Matir Asurim as an organization is like the full name. The Matir Asurim, the Jewish Care Network for Incarcerated People, is an organization that bridges inside-outside relationships with folks who are incarcerated in jails and prisons across the country and also internationally, with people who are outside, predominantly through a pen pal program. The pen pal program is, I believe, the most robust program. I've been there just for the past 8 or so months as a social work intern, but it has been around since 2021, and I've popped in and out throughout that time. I was talking to one of the founders recently, and they phrase it as, obviously, as we know, jails and prisons isolate people who are incarcerated from the outside world, but they also isolate people who are doing work inside from each other and from other organizers who are working around abolition, working to blur the lines between inside and outside relationships. And so Matir Asurim was founded really at a height of the COVID pandemic, 2021, trying to figure out in this time of extra levels of isolation for everybody, but particularly the communities inside, how can we further create networks of care, both between people inside, outside, and also between people outside who are doing this work and maybe have been barred from going in because of the pandemic, programs that were being shut down, especially volunteer programs that were being shut down, programs that I volunteer with inside now, all were inactive in 2021 because of restrictions by various departments of correction. So Matir Asurim was born out of that need, and they have created this really incredible pen pal program and also a lot of political education, seminars, webinars, classes, conversations for people who are outside, who are interested in learning how to connect with folks who are inside. A lot of places don't have a Jewish chaplain. So there's a Christian chaplain who is the catch-all chaplain for their facility. and didn't really understand the needs of Jewish people in custody, and like working with people who were already inside like chaplains and people who were outside like loved ones of people who are inside. So that is how it came to be, through conversations with lots of organizers on all sides of the like abolitionist, anti-Zionist, Jewish, leftist, people who've experienced incarceration, loved ones of people who are incarcerated spectrum, kind of coming together and thinking about how can we create an organization that is bridging Jewish organizing, Jewish ritual, and abolitionist organizing together. They also create written materials that go inside across the country and internationally, holiday-related materials that really have an eye towards materials that are able to get inside. A lot of materials created by Jewish organizations, and especially materials created by leftist organizations, are barred from going inside facilities across the country just due to restrictive regulations around what can and cannot be brought inside, and also like the logistics of bringing something inside when you don't have like exact names of like how many people might want this. Lots of barriers that Matir Asurim very thoughtfully works to avoid and to get around by creating materials that meet these really stringent requirements and that are also accessible to people who grew up with a really robust Jewish education and people who maybe found Judaism while inside, or who are newer to Judaism, who are just like interested in reading materials and really trying to bridge all of those gaps to get holiday materials to folks.
In these 8 months that you've been working with the Pen Pal program and just your experience with the org generally, have your personal understandings of concepts like care and captivity changed at all since doing this work? And if so, how?
I think it's interesting because I am coming in as one of the few people who are regularly involved with Matir Asurim, who are going inside regularly. Most of the other organizers either don't go inside at all, haven't been inside in a long time, go in pretty infrequently because they're really holding down the fort in the like inside outside work from the outside perspective. My background is predominantly through going inside. I have done very little of this kind of outside organizing until coming in, and I think that it has just been a reminder of the value of every person in the steps of liberation. I think that's an important thing in all organizing, but especially in this type of organizing when going inside has so many barriers. People with various criminal backgrounds like can't go inside. It's also super disability inaccessible. Like, I'm a disabled person, and the fact that I make it inside every week is like truly a miracle. And people who have mobility aids often can't go inside as a volunteer because we had a volunteer once trying to go inside who has crutches that like they cannot be without for one step, and they were like, you have to go through the metal detector, and they're like, I cannot go through a metal detector without my metal crutches. And they had no infrastructure for allowing this person inside, and it took truly hours of paperwork to get them inside the next time. Going inside is inaccessible for many reasons. It's far, it's expensive, transportation often, and it was just a really important reminder that any part of the care continuum is just as important, and people going inside can't happen without people outside doing the logistical work, and people who are inside who are then coming out also can't get the support that they need without people outside offering that support. There's no role that is more important. I think sometimes there's a view of like, well, going inside is the best way to create these relationships, and it's a great way to create relationships and also not the only way. The incredible impact of pen paling, just seeing the really strong relationships that people were making, life-changing relationships. We were getting emails from people inside who were like, oh, I'm being released on XYZ date, and like the first thing I want to do is connect with my pen pal or connect with this program. Like, that is so remarkable that these bonds can be forged despite the distance, despite the isolation, despite all of the factors. Like, the state apparatus is so mad that this is happening, and I think it's just a really important reminder that goals of abolition, like community care, like relationship building, like acknowledging the dignity and worth of everybody in the relationship, can be felt even while we navigate inside of these violent systems.
I think it's really important to uplift that, amplifying that there are so many ways to be involved in this type of organizing, and none of them are like better or worse than others. They all are important and parts of this ecosystem. You already named a lot of the challenges of organizing inside, but I'm curious if you can speak to specifically some of the challenges of organizing Jewish ritual and Jewish community inside jails, and maybe what people might misunderstand about doing that work.
I say very often that the inside congregation is what the future of Judaism should look like, although outside of the carceral setting, because there's just no other place that I've ever been in where like I'm at a Passover Seder and around one table is people of every Jewish background, people who were raised Orthodox and for whom Orthodoxy was important from the day they were born to the day that I met them, people who found out about Judaism like weeks prior, people for whom Passover is like the most important day of the year, and people who just were like, they told me to come to this dinner. What's it called? Like time of Passover. People of so many different racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, national origin backgrounds, people across the political spectrum, including political spectrums that are like usually not represented in US conversations at all. People of every possible background are gathering at a Passover Seder, and the arguments and the conversations and everything else that comes from it is like kind of the same you would find at every Passover, which is like a beautiful thing and also a challenge because you're coming in trying to create a Passover Seder, a Shabbat service, a high holiday service, especially that meets the needs of people of every background. And the outside people are like, I'm Orthodox. I want to go to an Orthodox service. I go to an Orthodox synagogue. I just am very new to Judaism. I want to go to a super accessible high holiday service. I find the most accessible synagogue I can go to here. Everyone is forced to engage in Jewish services and ritual in a way that is going to be uncomfortable for every person there because there's no service that's going to meet all of those needs. The group that I go in with is an all-volunteer group, and because of many reasons that I think we'll probably get into more, it's a pretty progressive group. It's also a group that is largely not Orthodox. There are some people who grew up Orthodox, but it's largely like a Reform conservative group because it's hard to like stay over and make it there. Sometimes we do manage that, but it's a little bit harder. It is definitely not, it's like also a predominantly queer group. It's a group that is also almost exclusively many years white volunteers. Thankfully, in the past few years, it's gotten to be a much more diverse group. But for years, it was like an all-white group of volunteers coming into a space that was people with really diverse religious backgrounds. Pretty decent number of like Orthodox men who felt very passionately about services being led by Orthodox men, of which there were none in this group. We're also going into a setting where it is very predominantly people of color, very predominantly men of color, and the organizers, the volunteers who are coming in are largely like women and femme white people. And so like there were so many dynamics at play, some that would be in any Jewish space and some that are particular to the Riker setting. Also, the getting to the service is very traumatic. Getting to a service requires being multiply handcuffed, multiply chained up because you're being transported to another building where a holiday service is taking place, unless you happen to be a resident of the building where the service is, which most people are not. And you're being put on a bus. You're often waiting on a bus that can be very hot or very cold for many, many hours. You're being strip searched when you come in to go into the service. It's a really traumatic process to get to a service. You're in a room doing a service with like 100 people who just experienced a life trauma and who have extremely different expectations of what a service should look like, what ritual should look like, what feeling connected should look like. And many people who would historically spend holidays with families and loved ones and communities they don't have access to in this moment. Most of the challenges are in creating a space that feels sacred and that feels accessible and that also feels like as much as what people need as possible, which is so challenging when everyone needs something different. I would say over my years doing this, the way that has worked well is just I will go in the weeks before a holiday and survey as many people as I can who are coming to the service and say like, what do you need out of the service? What can I prepare for you? Are you Russian speaking? Can we get a Russian prayer book for this service? Is this person from a community where they're worried when they go outside they're not going to be able to find a Jewish service? Can I come to the holiday prepared with materials for when you get out? Here's a Jewish organization in your neighborhood. Are there people who are like, I don't even understand what this holiday is, and I'm like nervous that I'm going to be judged for it. Can we bring like 101 packets to explain the holiday? And so I do that surveying. Also, the chaplains of the facility that I'm in survey and send me an email of like, here's the breakdown of people from each building where they fall on the spectrum of like religiosity, observance. And so we can prepare volunteers that way. So there are some things that we can do to mitigate it, but the biggest challenge is just creating a space that feels good as a religious space inside such a violent setting can feel for people.
You've mentioned so many barriers, from the heat to the shackles to the getting there. Have you heard any like specific concerns from the people that you are working with in there? Like, these are the issues that we are facing that we would love for you to find some type of way to help us navigate. Does anything come to mind for that? And if so, how do you work with them to address them?
Because I am going into facilities as a volunteer, it creates a little bit more and a little bit less access in different ways. I'm often going in with the lens of like, are you getting your kosher meals? Are you getting your grape juice? Were you getting called for services? Meaning like, I know that a service happened in your building last week. Did an officer offer to bring you to it as they are required to do? So I'm going in asking questions generally about pretty particular Jewish service access. And then I have some recourse working with the chaplains there to figure out like if the answers are no to those questions, what can we do to support that person and to make sure that changes. The things that people tend to bring to me the most are end up kind of being a de facto LGBTQ services support person because people see me when I come in and I get a lot of questions about like LGBTQ services. I am often doing referrals to move people to like housing areas that are gender aligned because theoretically everybody should be in a gender aligned housing area, but are not. And so sometimes I'll run into somebody, whether or not they were on my list for Jewish services somewhere, who's like, I'm a trans woman and should be in the women's building. And so I do referrals for that. I go in with a pastoral care angle. So a lot of the conversations that I have are less people coming to me with like grievances because they know that there's very little I can do logistically to support them because I don't even have access to the place where you file a grievance when I'm there in person. So anything that I do would have to be after the fact when somebody gets back to me, which I think even the congregants there, the people in custody, don't know that that's the situation. So they tend to go to people who they know can possibly move faster on that. So people are usually coming to me with, I just had a death in my family. I'm missing my daughter's birthday. I am maybe getting a divorce. Like people are coming to me as more of like a pastoral presence. Also, a lot of questions about religion. I also do people's change of religion forms if they want to change religion.
I really appreciate that insight, Rachel, because I think, interestingly, without having the same or even similar issues, Making Mensches has definitely experienced like an increase in requests for pastoral type care around the state of the world and being Jewish. But I'm curious about how caught up, especially I'll just name it, like Jewish leftists, Jewish anti-Zionists are with like the state of the world. And is it difficult to be Jewish? Is anti-Semitism like the number one thing that's important in the world? Is it the Jewish ethno-state? We get really caught up in the like geopolitics of it all. And I just think it's important to like ground and remember that there are people who are struggling to access a safe space to just be Jewish, not because of like, does this rabbi support this particular political position? Because people on the inside don't have the choice to choose from 6 different rabbis and 6 different congregations and have these like in-depth conversations with the board. Just thinking through some of the privileges that a lot of Jews on the outside never even consider, and specifically for Jewish community, perhaps it forces some people together in a way that wouldn't happen on the outside, but in some ways builds community in a way that people might not on the outside for Jews specifically. Are there people that just choose to stay away because they're like, that's not the community I want to be in? Is that a privilege people can afford? I'm curious just if you feel that that is reflective of the climate within some prisons as well.
Definitely interesting. The other thing that I do inside is I teach debate class, and our debate class is reliant on access to the news because our topics are political and are often current events and are chosen by our students each week. And they have very limited, if at all, sometimes access to the news, especially the building where I teach this particular class in is locked down often for like weeks at a time, meaning no access to like television, phone, really any outside communication. Like last week, they requested a debate about the Iran war. And we had like gone in prepared to like start that debate conversation. And they had been locked down like for a while prior. And everyone was kind of like, well, we don't even know what the status is right now. And so that creates its own complicated conversation where like we're having debates on political topics and we bring in information, and the information we bring in is the only information often folks have about that topic, which is interesting for like debate structure, but also interesting in like a larger conversation about access to information. And particularly, this was on my mind a lot just as a Jewish person on the outside who is very politically active in anti-Zionist and leftist spaces. I was on my way to the jail setting on the morning of October 7th, 2023. And I usually don't check my phone when I'm on the way there just because I'm like overwhelmed in the morning. And I had checked my phone as I was about to lock it in a locker and had so many missed calls and texts and messages because I was working at a Jewish nonprofit at the time and my extended family is entirely in Israel. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. And I was talking to family members who were really hysterical. And I was like, I don't really know how to address any of this. I have to get inside to this jail and teach this class. And the first thing on my mind really in that moment was like, Israel's about to like commit a genocide and this is horrific. And what else is going to happen to a country that has been doing ethnic cleansing since its founding? I didn't really have more thoughts beyond that in that exact moment. But also I was like, hope my family is okay. I was having lots of my own thoughts, but did not really process what was going on at all in that moment because I was like, I have to go teach a class in a jail right now. They're counting on me. Missing this class and not showing up is a huge deal. I can't deal with the outside world right now, which looking back is like such a complicated series of thoughts that I had standing outside a facility in front of a locker. Locked my phone away, went inside, and many people that I encountered that day had no idea that something major was happening in the world because something major in life or death was happening in their lives. One, because they didn't have access to news, and even those that did who had some sense of what was going on were also just like, I don't have access to my medicine. I can't see my own family. Like, I can't think about other people who can't see their families. I can't see my family. I'm experiencing state violence right this second. I'm experiencing state violence by the same people who are doing state violence there. There was so much about like what the day-to-day apparatus of state violence means to the people in front of me that there was kind of no room at that moment for folks to think about global news. And I've seen this happen so many times throughout my 5 years in the jail setting where like a major global event happens, a major event in the US happens, and people often find out about it within a couple days and are just like, wow, that sucks. But like, I want to be free. I can't think about anything other than my life and my safety and my freedom right now. And that makes perfect sense. And I think partially why our volunteer group for Jewish services is so heavily leftist anti-Zionist. Partially it's like because I'm doing the recruiting and those are the people that I know. But I think also largely because anti-Zionist Jews don't want to be in traditional Jewish spaces, don't want to be in synagogues, don't want to be connected to Jewish institutions. And in a very complicated way, this jail setting for Jewish services is a rare institution. No one's talking about Zionism. And we are talking about liberation, and we are like grounded in a liberation practice of blurring inside-outside lines and combating isolation and creating community. That is the practice of leftism, theoretically, and that's the practice of abolition. And the fact that there are Zionist Jews running most major Jewish institutions is like kind of none of our business inside this setting. Our business is create sacredness under this current oppressive system, which like is really a cognitive dissonance that I've had to grapple with over time. I'm thinking about Zionism, I'm thinking about anti-Zionism, I'm thinking about Palestine, I'm thinking about all of this, and it's so important to my life and to my identity, and almost never coming up in my conversations inside, even through like end of 2023, 2024. Like every once in a while I would walk into a dorm and I would yell Jewish services and someone would yell back like free Palestine, and I would yell back like so true, bestie. And then people would laugh and then we would move on with our day. And like that was kind of the extent that it was coming up even among Jewish people that I was interacting with. It is something I think about really weekly when I go in, you know.
It's just like I think is really, really difficult for people to conceptualize like how isolated people who are incarcerated actually are from the world and the truly unfathomable number of challenges that and barriers that exist every single day in their life, to the point that not only accessing a Jewish service that feels like the kind of Jewish service they want to be part of, but how they can even move from place to place, or the type of medical care they receive. And so, yeah, thinking about maybe what's happening outside is maybe sometimes the last thing on their mind, because they're like living in acute crisis every single day. We can care about what's happening outside because we have the privileges of being outside. I think we can hold both because we're on the outside. And I do think it puts in perspective like the immense amount of privilege it requires to even have the opportunity to hold both of those things is true. Also, just, it's so Jewish of you to also teach the debate class in jail.
I've never once had a congregant inside be like, do you have a recommendation for a synagogue I should join on the outside that is Zionist or anti-Zionist? Very often I'm asked the question, do you have a congregation I could join on the outside that will not be racist towards me, a man of color? That is very often the question that is asked. The Jewish community, including the leftist Jewish community, including anti-Zionist Jewish communities, are very racist, famously, often very white, and have a major problem with racism and with white supremacy. And so often I'm asked by people like, I want to engage with Jewish life outside, but I'm a Black man. Am I going to be questioned going into a synagogue? Is security going to give me a hard time? Do they have police officers at their front door, which many synagogues do increasingly every year? Are people going to ask me if I'm Jewish? Are people going to ask me who brought me? Are people going to ask me why I'm there? Are people going to think that I work there? Like, these are questions that I get so much more often than, is there a synagogue that is Zionist or anti-Zionist, or really anything else related to Jewish life outside? The number one thing, are there Black Jews? Because I'm often one of the only Jewish people that they're encountering, or the rabbi in the facility, and we're both white people. And I think this is often left out of conversations, including leftist Jewish conversations about like anti-oppressive Jewish practice, or creating safe spaces for Jews, or creating safe spaces for leftist or anti-Zionist Jews. There's often this like silent creating safe spaces for white leftist anti-Zionist Jews, and that is nowhere more apparent in my life than in these conversations that I'm having with people who are like in the most racist and violent place that you could possibly be in, and also worried about your synagogue's racism. And it feels like a really important reminder, particularly to leftist and anti-Zionist and queer spaces, that like your spaces are still not viewed as safe to so many people, particularly people of color. I think particularly Black men, who are so often targeted by security forces, including in synagogues and in Jewish spaces.
Rachel, thank you so much for uplifting that. I'm so glad that you added that, because I think that's so incredibly essential. And Making Mensches' starting point was talking about anti-racism in predominantly white congregations. And I do feel like there's been such a shift over the last few years to the focus on creating anti-Zionist space, catch-all umbrella. And we've maybe taken focus away from the very real material concerns of racism in Jewish spaces, and the fact that like this is still something that people are confronting entering any type of Jewish space in any place on the spectrum. And it also just makes me so sad to hear that that's like the question that you're being asked the most with people inside. And I'm thinking of folks who then maybe, God willing, leave jail and then go to a space, and it would make me so sad to hear that they're experiencing racism in the Jewish spaces they seek on the outside.
Thinking through that, and what predominantly white Jewish leftists with another degree of privilege of money or having not been incarcerated in any facility previously, using like arrest at a protest as like credentials. There's just this weird culture around Jewish protests, like especially Jewish leftist protests, and jail and carceral systems and police like politely arresting white Jewish leftists and then basically being like, show up at court in 6 weeks, bye, and not harming them, which is great. We don't want anyone to be harmed at a protest, but this weird like, oh yeah, I know jail. I sat in there for 3 hours and then my best friend came pick me up and we got sushi, like that kind of thing. And there's not a connection to like a Jewish community on the inside. That's not like talking about Jews who are on the inside who don't have the ability to protest in the same way you do. It's not supporting them through this connection at all. A side rant thinking about the real concerns that face people in jails and prisons. You're not helping them by getting arrested at a protest, and you're like feeding the carceral state in this weird way. I know sometimes like arrest can be a political tool that's important.
I feel very strongly about this. I like off-colorly joke about the way that a white person is arrested as a protest is the only time a Know Your Rights training matters. They're doing what a Know Your Rights training tells you an arrest is supposed to look like in a textbook. I do Know Your Rights trainings often for folks, and I use that as an example of like, this training I'm about to give you is what an arrest is supposed to look like by law, and the only time you'll ever see it is for white people at a protest. This is not what an arrest will look like. It's important to still know your rights so you can have a recourse after, but that is kind of the only time an arrest follows what an arrest is meant to follow. I've been in many spaces with predominantly white groups who are doing an intentional arrest, and there's like one Black man in the group whose arrest looks completely different than everybody else in the group. I think that a lot of people, including leftists, including organizers, don't always realize how pervasive the tentacles of the carceral state are. And when you get arrested, you get fingerprinted. When you get arrested, you get photographed. When you get arrested, your biometrics are taken by the state more than they are in your day-to-day life, which they already are so often, but even more so. You also very often, to get this favorable outcome in many states, they call it like a catch and release model, a no paper model, different types of decline to prosecute. In many places, there's a fee attached. There's a fee to get your papers. There's a fee to get your property back. There's a fee that you pay. You pay a fee just to get the decline to prosecute. They tell you in Know Your Rights trainings in various states across the country, have exact change on you, so that if you get the best outcome, you can pay the police the fee to get this outcome. You're often giving money to the state, and getting arrested intentionally has some political meaning sometimes. And like, I'm not here to say like there's never a reason to engage in intentional arrest. There's historically many times where it's been beneficial to a movement and has pushed a movement forward. It's also really way more complicated than I think like white leftists, including white Jewish anti-Zionist leftists who do it every weekend, are necessarily thinking. Every time you have to show up in court, a court officer is getting paid for them when there's court is open for 100 arrests and it has to stay open an hour late. They're all getting overtime. Like, there's so much money going into the carceral system, especially when we're overwhelming it, which is often the goal of mass intentional arrest, is to overwhelm the system. Overwhelm the system means overtime. Overwhelm the system means funding. Overwhelm the system means the next time the police commissioner writes a budget, they say, we had enough money to have 7 police vans. These protests are requiring 8 police vans. Give us $100,000 more for a decked out police van. There's so many consequences to intentional arrest that benefit the carceral state. And again, I'm like not telling people not to do it or that it's like a blanket bad thing, but it's really important to remember all of these things and to make really intentional choices around it. A few years ago, Dean Spade gave this like interview about the difference between intentional arrest for statement making and intentional arrest for safety. And he was talking about like, if an ICE agent is snatching a person off the sidewalk and you get in between, you know you're going to get arrested. That's an intentional arrest, but it's an intentional arrest in a way that puts your body on the line and like potentially protects a person's physical safety and life, versus an intentional arrest in front of a building. And I've supported these arrests. Like, I've done jail support. I've done support for these mass actions. It would be very hypocritical of me to say like, don't do it or they're bad. They just are so much more complicated than mainstream white leftists want you to think they are, and are not the same as being justice involved in literally any other way. Even people who end up with the same outcome for like a desk appearance ticket for shoplifting from CVS, if someone's shoplifting deodorant because they don't have access to deodorant and end up with the same court outcome as you, it is not the same experience as you getting arrested with a group that you have so much safety in and a lot of privilege in, and like the economic privilege to pay that. Like, someone who's getting arrested because they're unhoused and is stealing deodorant doesn't know what to expect in police custody, often doesn't have an ID on them, which means they're going to be held over till arraignment, where you know, because you have your ID on you, because you got a training beforehand, that you're going to be released, especially, I mean, at least in New York, that you're going to be released and can show up to court but on your own volition with your friends and family. Like, it's such a different and divorced process. And I absolutely hear you. And I've heard people say like, yeah, I have an arrest history. And I'm like, yes, technically true and extremely different and separate from this. The landscape of intentional arrest has changed a lot since 2020, which is when I feel like this conversation happened so mainstream, where like the surveillance state has changed a lot. Also, there's been some really effective intentional arrests. There have been some really violent intentional arrests. Like, the landscape has just shifted. So I'm curious to also see like how organizers who have kind of led this conversation's opinion has shifted in this changing landscape. And the landscape of who is being intentionally arrested has also gotten net widened a lot more.
I think that that's really, really important, and like just provides a perspective that I think we're really not talking about enough or often. And I was also thinking while we were talking about even within protests where mass people are getting arrested, the differences in the ways that Palestinian protesters, but really any protesters of color on the left are getting arrested versus like white Jewish leftist protesters. There's a divide even within that, and even within what protesters who are white Jewish leftists experience versus everyone else. And this is leading me to a question that I have around the connections between anti-Zionism and prison abolition. What do you see the overlaps being, or abolition in general? Honestly, it doesn't have to be just prison abolition like we've talked about. What do you see the connections to be, if any?
I think that both anti-Zionism and abolition, both as a theory of being and also prison abolition specifically, are all in service of a better world, are all in service of a more just world. But my more practical response to it is Zionism and the carceral state materially inform each other. NYPD and the IDF historically train each other. Tactics from the United States, like carceral state, prison systems, policing systems, are used on Palestinian prisoners. IDF tactics are used to strengthen the chemical weapons that are being deployed in the jails in our city. These are also like materially related struggles, and the landscape of jailing is quite similar. The Israeli authorities have an extremely robust administrative detention, which is just like holding people hostage, as does New York City, which is its jail complex where 85% of the people are detained pre-trial. That is a system of mass isolation, violence, and hostage taking of people who have been deemed to have committed no crime by even the most violent and repressive state apparatuses. The way that we incarcerate, the way that we enact mass violence informs the way that Israel does it, and the way that Israel does it informs the way the US does it. And so I think there's like kind of a belief system similarity between these two. A world without Zionism and a world without prisons and jails and detention centers is a better world and is a safer world and is a more just world. And also, you cannot fight one without fighting the other. When you fight against the existence of police forces in the US, you take away a huge educational infrastructure for IDF soldiers. When you fight against and take away a settler colonial state, you take away a huge scientific weapons research facility. These things are really informing each other. I have a lot of experience being in the jail setting and experiencing pepper spray, which I think people hear about pepper spray and think like, oh, it's that thing that people like sell on keychains to like get an attacker away. And like the pepper spray that the state is using is actually entirely different. I have experienced pepper spray largely secondhand, meaning I was not the direct target of pepper spray, but I was in the room or I was in the space, and developed adult asthma as someone who's never had asthma just by being in the space where pepper spray was deployed, even hours before sometimes. It is a genuine weapon of mass violence and is viewed pretty casually in the US and like by even people who are like quite well informed about violent apparatuses, and is deployed in Palestinian villages to enact ethnic cleansing. There's so much material similarity in these systems, and so the fight against them also has to be materially similar and also has to have the same amount of force and coalition building and longevity. There's so much to learn from people who are fighting for resistance in Palestine, Palestinian youth organizers, from queer and trans Palestinian organizers in Palestine, and how they have been for generations resisting state violence. There's so much to learn from their fortitude in the fight against state violence in the US in the form of police, in the form of prisons, in the form of jails. There is another side that is maybe like a softer entryway side, which is there's no continuity of life. There's no future generations to think about when more and more populations of people are being incarcerated by the state, are being ethnically cleansed, are experiencing mass violence. I think particularly in the US, we see every few months at this point, like more and more marginalized populations being like targeted federally in ways that like the outcome, should they follow the steps of oppression, is genocide and is mass violence and is the mass disappearing of communities. We're seeing ICE enact the mass disappearing of communities. We've been seeing since the beginning of the prison industrial complex, entire communities of Black and brown men being disappeared into the carceral system. We're seeing laws that are trying to keep trans people out of public life altogether. State violence doesn't have a cap, and so neither can our activism, which I think brings me to a previous point, which is like the importance of every single person's role in the struggle, which I see this in Palestine, people talking about like the grandma who cooks in a house that is half rubble for the people who are fighting for liberation in her area. And I think the same way about people who do jail support outside of the Brooklyn jail in New York, who like pass out free cigarettes and cookies when people are coming out. All of these roles, from a pen pal who has never set foot in a jail setting, but who has the time and capacity to create a loving relationship with somebody inside, to somebody who is doing a potluck for political education so people can be mobilized, to the person who is going inside and creating a writing circle or a class or a sacred space, a place where people can experience like humanity in a different way than they usually get, to people who are on the front lines of like a protest and fighting or trying to like create change in these like more macro levels. Like all of these things are important because state violence has no cap. And so neither can our community care or the fight for a better world or the fight for liberation. And so I think there's really material ways that these two things are connected in the way that they do harm. And I think we can learn more about how our responses can also be materially connected. And I think mutual aid is one of the most important ways right now that we can meet each other's needs, for people who are coming out of prisons or inside prisons, and also for people who are living in our neighborhoods and living in our communities, and people that we work with and people in our homes who like also need access to all of this care to be able to create these more intense and more robust coalitions in service of anti-Zionist and abolitionist goals.
Speaking of more robust coalitions and extending these care networks, could you tell us a bit about the NYC Resource Library and how that relates to abolition?
So the NYC Resource Library is an online database of 600 plus free resources across New York City, resources like housing resources, food resources. We just created a pretty large like Code Blue guide during the winter, resources for like heat, and we'll have some cooling resources for the summer, and trans healthcare resources, just whatever resources we can find that are free and available to people in New York City, as well as like a in-person kind of like pop-up mutual aid distribution where we've been distributing masks, COVID tests, Narcan, fentanyl test strips, gender-affirming supplies when we can, sexual health supplies, like a variety of supplies just to meet needs of people around the community. We've also been collaborating with different activist groups, organizing groups to see what are the people that you're serving in your communities need or that you're organizing with in your communities. What can we kind of help bridge gaps and do linkages of care to? And I think some of the goals of abolition and of organizing are to be counter to violent state systems. And we've talked a lot in this of the violent state systems of jails and prisons, but also like social service agencies and shelters or substance use sites or places that historically and more mainstream people are seeking to get care. And those places have been violent forever. They've been violent because they've been racist and they've been classist and they've been ableist and they've been homophobic and all of these things forever. But also they're like dwindling now and are being targeted by the government and are being criminalized. Harm reduction programs are being criminalized in many states now. Giving fentanyl test strips and Narcan are being seen as like paraphernalia for drugs and being criminalized. Sexual health programs historically have been criminalized and continue to be criminalized. Gender affirming care programs, of course, are being criminalized. And I think for a lot of people, and I don't mean this as a critique, just I'm going to offer an alternate perspective. Many people, their response is like, so let's bring this to the legislature and fight and elect people who are gonna protect these programs. And mutual aid says, like, actually, fuck those systems altogether. They've never been for us. They'll never be for us. How do I find a way to get Narcan in the hands of somebody who has a loved one who is using opioids? How do I get a binder in the hands of somebody who lives in a state where they cannot access any gender affirming equipment? Somebody recently taught me how to make stand to pee underwear. And I'm like, that is something I would have never thought to like ask somebody to teach me. But someone was like, I know how to do this. And it's like a gender affirming supply. You want to know how to do it? And I said, okay. And we did that. And like how to Narcan train, like part of the resource libraries, we do Narcan trainings everywhere that we go. How do we make sure people are resourced as individuals and as communities so that they don't have to rely on the state, or they can rely just even like 1% less on the state and on these state infrastructures. The point of mutual aid is that there's no barrier. A lot of places, including in New York City, like soup kitchens that require an ID, like that's ridiculous. People who are unhoused often have no way to keep track of their paperwork. Like, how are you going to require an ID to get a basic need? Places that offer mental health care, but not to people with histories of violence. Places that are supportive housing, but not for folks who are on the sex offender registry, which is like a famously racist and classist and ableist and homophobic and transphobic registry and system. Like, there's so many barriers even to somewhat progressive services, and mutual aid allows, at least to some extent, to be able to say, like, I have a thing, you need the thing, here's the thing. I have a skill, you want the skill to pass on, let me teach you the skill without any barriers, without any litmus testing or needs testing. And that is the goal of abolition, is like create community and create care and meet people's needs in a way that is not using state violence, that is community-based and not isolation-based, that is rooted in love and dignity and doesn't ask people to share personal things about themselves or to put their own safety on the line to get basic needs met. Abolition and mutual aid are rooted in the belief of like, we got each other. And that's like all we need.
For people who are not involved in mutual aid work already, for people who are not involved in abolition-based work already, when I think about mutual aid, that is like Olam Haba. That is like the world that I am working towards building. Like, that mutual aid is that. Whenever I see it in action, when I see the work that you're doing with New York City Resource Library, when I see people handing out snacks outside jails, or even just talking to their neighbors. Like, when I see people talking to their neighbors and being human beings, I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna get there actually, and we're making it happen right now. We are living in that world now. We just need to like broaden it. Sometimes we're gonna be in spaces with people who actually maybe we're not perfectly aligned with. My neighbor and I might have a really different outlook on Zionism, for example. I don't even know if my neighbor is thinking about Zionism. I do not think that he is like an older gentleman living in Harlem. I don't think he's thinking that much about Zionism. Maybe he is. Maybe I'm typecasting. But like, we say hi to each other in the elevator and ask each other how our day is. And he brings my packages upstairs when I'm not home to get them, because people steal stuff from our lobby all the time, which I hope that they're getting good money for what they take. Clearly they need it. But like, building community even with the people around you who maybe are not the people you gravitate towards or the people you have commonality with is part of the work. Sitting in spaces where, yeah, maybe we have different experiences of the world, different political alignment, different ways of practicing Judaism, different ways of practicing religion in general. Like, that is part of the work that I think often we're missing and can feel like the stickiest and the hardest. And that's why I think we're missing it a lot of the time. Purity, politic culture of the left makes it so that we're actually making it harder to create community and to like connect with people and create the world we want to see, because creating the world we want to see, creating the world that we want to live in requires all of us. Like, we are all being harmed by the system. All of us, even the people that maybe we're not in perfect agreement with, besides the 1%, but I doubt any of us are really engaging with like the true 1%. And so we do have to all work together to get there. It doesn't mean that we all have to be besties. You know what I mean? Like, it's coalition building, basically. Like, we don't need to be like chatting and yapping, but we do need to connect and be able to see, how can we support each other's goals? Often we're all working towards a similar place, ultimately.
I think when I'm trying to bring in new people into jail and prison spaces, people who are maybe have been doing abolitionist organizing from the outside or who haven't but are interested in getting involved with work, especially inside work, the number one question before anything else is like, well, what if I meet somebody who's there on a charge that is upsetting to me? What if there's somebody there who has a high profile case that I know about and it's something that is like activating to me? And that is going to happen. And I say that every single time of like, if you engage in this space, you're going to meet people that are challenging for you to engage with. Everyone has different things that are challenging for them to engage in. One of the most challenging people that I've met in my time organizing inside, the thing that makes him challenging to me has nothing to do with his criminal case. It's the fact that like he is really sexist and like says very sexist things to me and like constantly in every conversation, every time we talk, like multiple times. And it's just like annoying more than anything else. And I like still see him every single week and I still would create as much safety as I possibly can for him in those moments. And I would still organize with him to create a sacred space in the middle of this dorm, in the middle of a jail in a very violent institution, because he doesn't have to be my best friend, but I want him to have access to his basic needs. And I view spirituality and community care and relationships as basic human needs, just as I view food and water. And I will still do everything I can to ensure he has access to those things. And acknowledging there's a huge power imbalance. If we met on the outside, he is a white man, I am a white queer person, and there would be a very different power dynamic if we met on the outside, but we didn't. And I have so much more privilege in that space as someone who can leave, and that's something I spend so much time talking to volunteers or potential volunteers about. The entire dynamic is different. And more so to this point, you will meet people that you would not want to hang out with in your personal life as you would going into any building with 7,000 people. You will meet people who say things that are upsetting to you. People will talk about charges, and they are just charges, which are meaningless in their own way. Or even if you're going to a prison system, convictions, which are also meaningless in their own way, for crimes that are upsetting to you. Or people might just say to you, I did this thing and that thing is upsetting to you. When you leave, we will ensure you have community to process those feelings with. When you're inside, your goal is not to become best friends. Your goal is to say, like, our safety is bound together, our liberation is bound together. Let's move through this together in a way that makes sense for both of you and that creates the goal of like access to relationship. I didn't say it has to be access to easy relationship. It's access to relationship. It's a relationship to have a difficult conversation. It reminds somebody you care about them enough as a person and you view them as a whole person to have a difficult conversation with them. And I think at its core, abolition and mutual aid and any of this work is just like, I'm a person, you're a person. The only way we get through it is together, you know?
Thank you for saying that. I think it's really important and kind of leads us into our next question, which is if people are interested in getting involved with doing work inside or supporting from the outside or supporting from literally anywhere, supporting their communities, how can they get involved? So this is like a both and question. First of all, how can people get involved with Matir Asurim or supporting New York City Resource Library? And also, if people don't have access to New York City Resource Library or Matir Asurim for whatever reason, how can they get involved in mutual aid work or abolition work?
Talk to your neighbor. But more concretely, the way to get involved in Matir Asurim, I believe, is through emailing matirasurimnetwork@gmail.com. Matir Asurim has folks across the country and outside of the country. We recently did a webinar where there were folks from Ireland, from Canada. So if there's not already someone in the network physically where you are, Matir Asurim can certainly help connect you with people who are available virtually to create that community space with. And there's always people looking to be connected with pen pals. So that's a great way to get involved from the beginning. To get involved in the New York City Resource Library, the best way is to DM us on Instagram, which maybe is an annoying answer, but our Instagram is just at NYC Resource Library. We also have an email address, which is nycresourcelibrary@proton.me. But I will say I've been having some trouble with that email address sometimes, but you can try either way. And that is the best way to get involved. We do a lot of offline work that will stay offline, and I won't go into details about, but other ways to just like get supplies to people who need them. So please feel free to reach out there if you're not in New York City or if Matir Asurim is not accessible to you yet. In any way, if you're interested in getting involved just in organizing, I would say like joining an existing organizing group is always the best way to get involved. Feel free to also reach out to the Resource Library Instagram if you're like, I'm in XYZ location and want to start something like this, or ideally see if something like this already exists. I'm also happy to help coordinate folks to get connected to other organizations or to look into existing mutual aid networks together. I think that getting involved in organizing for people who are not involved in organizing already can feel really daunting. There's so much out there, anti-Zionist organizing, there's so much abolitionist organizing going on, and I think any new space can be really scary for people. And my general advice would be, first, just like meeting people is the way to do it. You don't have to like join leadership of an organization to be part of it. Like show up to an event, show up in a space, show up to a book club. Like a book club is a great way to get the feel of like, what does an organizing space look like that is a pretty low barrier. Host a potluck. Like a potluck is mutual aid. You're bringing food to each other. Like there are ways to kind of what I like to call microdose organizing before like diving in if you're really new to the practice. If you are in a place that has public libraries, go to the public library, attend a class there, sit and read at a large table that will have other people come sit and read at it with you. Like there are so many things that I think are not viewed as organizing. Also because of the internet, people are like, the front lines is organizing. The front lines is the front lines. All the lines behind it are how the front line functions. So if there's a mutual aid distro in your area, cook for them, even if you can't stay and be part of it. If there's an organizing event happening, offer to help with cleanup from the event. Nobody ever offers to help with cleanup. That's a great way to get organizers to like you and to bring you into the fold. Everything that you're doing in service of collective liberation, in service of community care, and by that I mean in service of one more person feeling a little less alone in whatever they're doing, is the work. Start wherever you are. Matir Asurim is a great place to start. The Resource Library is a great place to start. Also, wherever you are is like a great place to start. Do something to connect to one more person or to learn about one more need in your area. And like that is going to be a way to be part of this network of change. I think another way to start being engaged in this work, which I think can never be the only way, but is a place to start or a thing to add on to if you're already someone who's really engaged in the work. I think people who are really on the front lines forget this one sometimes, which is just like engaging in healing work for yourself. It is extremely hard to be a person, particularly a marginalized person, particularly a person who is most affected by all of these apparatuses of state violence that we've talked about. And wherever you find yourself on that spectrum, engaging in work of healing, of connecting to your body, of connecting to your community, whether it is like through therapy or through community care, whatever healing looks like for you, there's so many ways to engage in healing work, through movement, through anything that aids you in your own healing. I think a lot of people get really discouraged by movement work because they don't feel grounded in themselves and they don't feel grounded in engaging with others, or are really easily being like triggered and activated in these really high stress spaces. Whether you're on the front lines or not, organizing requires thinking about violence. It often requires pushing up against violent systems directly. It involves like really intense interpersonal work, and all of these things are much harder when you don't feel safe in your own self. And so I do also think like engaging in healing work alongside the work that you're doing or as a starting point to get involved in work is really important. And there are so many people who this is the focus of their teaching around organizing and around abolition, and highly recommend checking out those people. I know that Making Mensches has uplifted many of them. And I think for each person, like when you're thinking about how do I engage in community, you also need to engage in community from like a grounded space. And I think people forget that and sometimes get really easily burnt out and have really major community conflict and then end up perpetuating cycles of like carceral harm in their relationships and like canceling people and isolating people and creating factions and doing these things in their organizing spaces that are just like mirroring the way that the carceral state responds to harm and is like not rooted in transformative justice. And healing for yourself creates like more transformative relationships for your communities and can help step into, help like move into mutual aid and abolition work.
Thanks for sharing that. And I hope that if you're listening, this can empower you to jump in wherever you are.
If you could leave our listeners with one message for today, what would that be?
No one is disposable, and moving through the world with the like knowledge and intention that no one is disposable, not you, not your neighbor, not the person you really, really hate, not the person that you have nothing in common with, and not the person that the state is telling you is disposable. That is the goal of the carceral state, is to tell you all of these people for all of these reasons are disposable and don't deserve to be in community and don't deserve access to care and don't deserve your attention or your thought. That is the goal of settler colonialism, that the people that were here before were disposable, and that's why we get to be here. That is the goal of like all of these violent systems, is to tell people if you're privileged, you matter, and if you're not, you're disposable. And moving through your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your community, your relationship to your organizing with, I deserve care and I deserve access to spirituality and access to freedom and freedom of movement, and so does every single other person. Everything else ideologically will fall into place from there, knowing like that you are not disposable, and especially the people that the state tells you are disposable are not disposable, I think is the most important path forward. That is the way that we create sustained connections, and that is the way that we will take down all of these violent systems.
Rachel, it was such a joy getting to have you on the podcast personally, just because I think you're great, but also you just provided so much incredible, valuable insight for folks who are listening. So thank you for all the work that you do, and thanks for coming on the podcast. It was so great getting to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to Making Mensches for being a space for all these conversations and also all of the other things you all do throughout the year. You're all so amazing.
Thanks for listening to Making Mensches. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmensches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Mensches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Mensches, the podcast, is produced by Elana Lipkin and Jesi Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jesi Sander.